Yo, what's up? We back out here again, trying to get 3 degrees buffer. 2 degrees, sorry, I forgot. I still gotta explain that one for you. But anyway, we out here. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and share. We out here going through this Solitude in Nature sermon that I've been writing. Been working on it this morning for, let's see, what time is it now? About almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Been working on it for about 4 hours or so. Maybe a little bit longer than that at this point. And I've got the introduction done, and I'm down now to the point where I go into the Bible illustrations. So I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to circle back to the introduction and the conclusion at one point when I'm done. So we'll get there. But I want to jump right into this because it's so interesting to me. This concept of solitude in nature, to give you again a little bit of a recap or kind of a snapshot of where I'm coming at from this. You know, growing up within Christianity, it felt very sterile to me. It felt like very much of a, it's this way you do things, particular way, particular things that you do. When it comes to reading the Bible and studying, there's a particular way to do that. When it comes to praying and talking with God, there's a particular way to do that. Particulars. And that gets old. Like I said, you fall asleep while you're praying if you're kneeling up and your head's on your mattress or your pillow there. You're trying to read and you get lost through Leviticus or Numbers and you wonder, what is the point of this? There's nothing really going on. It can be very hard to find anything more than just consistency in an experience like that. And it's tough because everyone else is telling you, hey, you're supposed to read through the whole Bible, you being a follower of Jesus and all. So you're supposed to know this stuff, and it's supposed to have some profound impact on you, and you struggle to find that, and you end up saying, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. Solitude is a factor that's highlighted well enough, I think, within Christianity when it comes to the idea of a personal walk and relationship with Jesus. But solitude in nature, I think, is where, again, it takes a whole new level and experience on, and I think that's what we need more of. It'll be really cool when I go through some of the things I found in one of my textbooks for my class and share that with you. But I want to jump into the first Bible story I'm going to be talking about in my paper. It's about Moses. Now, Moses, when you really consider it, his entire experience circles around this idea of solitude in nature. Now, most of his experience involves the wilderness, but the wilderness is still a part of nature. But let's back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Moses is born, right? You can follow along in Exodus chapter 1 and 2. You see the background of the Israelites. You see their story. Exodus chapter 2, we hear about Moses being born. And a few months after he's born, he ends up being put by his mother into a basket that's placed on the Nile River. His sister is set to look out for it. And he's there by himself in nature. Solitude in nature. Even as a 3-month-old child, Moses is experiencing this already from the jump. He's picked up and found by the daughter of Pharaoh, and he goes to live in their society. So he ends up getting both the Egyptian way of life and their culture and experience, but also because he was nursed by his mother on orders from the daughter of Pharaoh, he ends up getting the Hebrew side of culture and experience and environment as well. So he's got both of these things going on. There's some tension going on there. And it reminds me of a worship series that I did for a school a while back. I'm going to have to do that because there's so many other things worth talking about within this story that I'm going to be skipping because I'm focusing just on the solitude in nature part for the sake of this paper. But anyways, short story is that there's the conflict within Moses between his Hebrew heritage and his Egyptian heritage and upbringing. And it comes to a head as he sees where he is in the palace compared to where the Hebrew people are in society as slaves. There's a Hebrew he sees getting beaten by an Egyptian. He kills the Egyptian. Turns out that the Hebrew ratted him out. And so he's, it looked like what he was doing should have been a benefit or made the Hebrews happy with him, but they were upset. And obviously the Egyptians were upset. So Moses, who was really tied to both cultures, ends up separated from both, and he has to flee Egypt. He goes to the land of Midian. He stays out there. Well, before I even get to that, the journey, I don't know how far it is from Egypt to Midian. But again, Moses would find himself alone in nature, trying to figure things out, probably having a lot of questions about his own life and existence and the purpose, the reason. All these different things are probably going on in his head, and it's just him, nature, and God to figure these things out. He ends up staying out there in Midian for 40 years, tending to sheep, again, outside in the wilderness by himself with the sheep, but by himself and nature, solitude in nature. Obviously, he lived with people, he got married when he was out there, but the majority of his time is spent alone with God and nature. And this experience comes to a head by the story of the burning bush. We find that in Exodus chapter 3. And this is a huge catalyst for everything that Moses is going to do later on in his life. What's so interesting about this experience is Moses is both scared, but his curiosity kind of overcomes his fear. But once he ends up engaging with the bush, that's God speaking through it, you see the fear come up again, and he doesn't want to do what God in the bush is asking him to do. And it takes all this convincing and all these miracles and all these things to show, hey, I got you, it'll be okay. But again, in a snapshot, I think that's the kind of thing that God can do for us when we spend time alone with him in nature. It's a time where we can really focus on the questions that we have. It's a time when we can focus on the doubts that we have about ourselves and our own ability. It's a time when we can question God and say, hey, are you really about this? Are you really here in my favor? Are you really working for me or not? And God can help answer any and every single one of those questions for us. It's amazing. Solitude in nature. And Moses gets somewhat of a confidence boost, at least enough to say that he'll go tag team with his brother Aaron to actually go to Egypt and try to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. So you have that whole instance that happens, right? You know the story, the 10 plagues, and eventually Pharaoh says, all right, I'm going to let you go. And even though he's going to regret it later, Moses, Aaron, the Israelites end up leaving Egypt, and they are out in the wilderness yet again for a time. And so now it's interesting, right? Because Moses, who had had this wilderness experience on his own to kind of rediscover himself, his relationship to God, and the purpose for his life, now the Israelites with him are in the wilderness to discover the exact same things. And it's met with a challenge at first. The same way that God tried to describe who he was to Moses, the same way that you have God trying to describe himself to the Israelites and them having a question about it, and God having to show them something miraculous to kind of convince them that, hey, the things that I say I'm going to come through on, and I'm good for it. That would be the Red Sea and the deliverance from the Egyptian army. And so from that point, they end up in the wilderness circling around for 40 years, the same way that Moses had previously done the previous 40 years. And their experiences are so parallel. It's interesting. You have Israel, who's in the wilderness now, and they're in solitude as a nation in nature with God. Mount Sinai is where we have the big display of that. And, they end up going around and so on. Moses, to keep the story short, eventually, I think they had to go another 40 years, if I'm being accurate there, because of something. I don't remember exactly what it was that happened. I got to freshen up. I'm a little rusty. But the bottom line would be that Moses actually does not end up entering the promised land when Israel gets there, and they are cleared to go in because of some mistakes that he made and some bad decisions that he made along the way. So what do we find? That Moses goes up on Mount Nebo by himself. So he's out there alone in solitude with God in nature once again. And this is actually where we find the life of Moses come to an end, this interaction with God. So it's interesting. Interesting is the word that comes up because there's so many little things that you can find here that I think are very powerful for us. But it's a cool thing as well to be able to see how this idea of solitude in nature traces itself literally from the beginning to the end of the life of Moses. And we get to see the amazing things that he was able to be a part of I think spurred on in large part because of his time in solitude with God in nature, particularly. All right. So David's story is interesting. The story of Christ, I think there's a lot there. There are some other characters as well in the Bible who I think have really compelling stories and instances of this idea of solitude in nature. We'll talk about them in brief a little bit in future videos. And I'll probably make a longer video and go through the entire paper, the entire sermon, even though it's supposed to be 15 pages long and probably is going to be like an hour and a half. At least I'll do that. I'll put some chapters on it. That way you can fast forward and get to the parts you haven't seen yet or whatever. I'll leave that up to you. But let me know what you think about this idea of solitude in nature. If it's something that you think you could use more of, you feel like you're getting enough, what's your experience been with it? If it's something that you've done before, do you find that there's something different about being out in nature as opposed to being indoors when it comes to your spiritual experience? Let me know. Be curious to find out. But anyway, I'll catch y'all in the next one. It's Ngoriako Corey Johnson. We out here trying to get 2 degrees buffer, working on this doctorate. And yeah, I'll see you. Peace.